Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Matthew Antonelli, and I'm the Director of Operations at the International OCD Foundation. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is a widely misunderstood disorder that impacts up to 238 million people worldwide. Because of the lack of accurate representation and resources, people often don't know what they're struggling with when they have OCD. That is why it's so important for us to continue to put the true resources and education out there, as well as having accurate media representation around what OCD really is. We are so proud to have presented Scheana Shay with our 2024 Illumination Award. Scheana is an actress, singer, and host and star of the Vanderpump Rules show. She also uses her Shenanigans podcast to highlight OCD and discuss different resources around the disorder. So we're so lucky to have you here.
Happy to be here.
How's everything been since the conference? We know you're on your journey with OCD treatment.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to share that you've experienced since the conference?
Back on meds.
Very good.
It was kind of the kick I needed, just speaking to so many people and having people thank me for being so open about it and knowing that I've helped people, but I felt like I wasn't helping myself, and I was trying to fight getting back on meds for so long. But it got to the point where I'm like, if I'm borderline tears almost daily because of the intrusive thoughts going on in here, maybe I should just alleviate some of that. So thanks to the doctor you recommended. He is fantastic. I'm back on Zoloft and proud to talk about it. And I just don't want there to be a stigma around being on an SSRI or any medication. You know, it's there for a reason. It's there to help. And I just feel more balanced, and when I'm the best version of myself, I'm the best mom for my daughter, and that was the most important thing. I'm like, I need to put my mental health first, because it was getting to the point where every night I would put her to bed, I would just like have tears in my eyes, like, what if this is the last time I see her? What if something happens to her? What if something happens to me? What if she grows up without a mom? And it was just like every night this cycle where I've only been back on them for a few weeks, so I don't know if it's like, placebo right now, but just knowing that I'm putting that first and knowing that it's going to get better and easier, and I'm not feeling like I'm on the verge of tears every day, which is great.
Well, thank you for the vulnerability and the confidence it takes to share that story. That is such a unfortunately familiar story for many in our community. I've struggled with that stigma around what it means to be on a daily medication. Does that somehow make me weak or change who I really am? And ultimately, those were obstacles preventing me from getting better.
Yeah.
And hearing people like you, Scheana, who are so willing to talk about your journey honestly, you normalize that experience.
Yeah.
You really allow people to feel like it's okay to not only take the medication that they need, but then to talk about it as well.
Totally. And just with being so open about it since the conference, I've had moms at my daughter's school say that they've seen my speech, or there's this one woman who's a therapist, and she told me that a couple of her patients had said that they now realize that they have OCD just because of me specifically talking about it on the show, posting about it on social media, talking about it on my podcast. And she was telling me how she had a patient who was suicidal because she didn't know what was wrong with her, and she's now doing so much better and in therapy because of me. She's like, there are people who you are helping every day, and
how incredible.
That's why I do this, that's why I've always wanted to have a platform, is to literally be able to help others know that they're not alone. And it's normal, It's
right.
like, it doesn't feel like it, but it's like the more you talk about it, the more you realize so many people do suffer in silence because they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to tell someone what's going on in their head because they don't want to seem crazy. I didn't want someone to think I wanted to harm my child, or what if I say this and someone thinks this? And it was a terrifying thing to open up about. But one day I felt a safe space in therapy, and I'm like, all right, look, I got to tell you something, because this is like starting to be on a loop, and here I am.
And that courage, that you're showing is so inspiring to all of us.
Thank you.
That same story happened to me about your coming out with your diagnosis.
Yeah.
I've been with the foundation more than 5 years. I'm open about my OCD journey and treatment. Some of my best friends also struggled with OCD and didn't even tell me until they saw you.
Wow.
And you really impacted her life in such a strong way. And now she proudly shares, not only with me, but those in her life about her OCD journey, that she got treatment, and she doesn't feel embarrassed or a stigma around it because of you.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's something for me, the resources that I found through working through the foundation that really propelled my recovery forward as well. I know that you've talked about some mental health struggles that you had before your postpartum OCD as well. And I'm, you know, curious what you've been able to discover in terms of, you know, the resources you found through us and beyond, any learnings from the conference that maybe you would want to share with our audience.
Yeah, I didn't really know the names of everything, like ERP, CBT, and
Very good.
all of that. And I was like, okay, wait, what is, I was like, oh, exposure response prevention. Yes.
Perfect.
So I didn't even realize, but I just like low-key started doing my own exposure therapy. And I told my therapist about this, and it started with, I mean, it probably doesn't seem stupid to anyone in this room, but it was a numbers thing. I followed 420 people on Instagram for like a decade. And if I met someone new, I unfollowed someone old, and it was just, I needed to see that number. The TV volume, just little things like this. The radio needed to be at a certain notch. And I was at a movie premiere. I met these two girls from Big Brother, actually, and they were so sweet, and I followed both of them, but I'm like, oh my God, now I need to go unfollow 2 people, and I'm going through 422 people, and I'm like, I couldn't find someone to unfollow, and I'm like, then the next week I met someone else, and I'm like, this is stupid. Why do I care about how many people I'm following? Now I'm at like 894, I don't know. But it's like that many connections I've legitimately made in the last 2 years because I was like, you know what, I don't care about the number anymore. And I told my therapist that, and she goes, that's exposure therapy. You just did that on your own. I'm like, oh, what? And I'm like, I don't care what volume the TV's at. I'll turn the radio a couple extra, one less, and just those little things is how I started my exposure therapy. And
it challenges those expectations that we think we're going to have, that we're not going to be able to handle this, that if I follow 421 people, I'm going to feel so much distress that it's going to impact the quality of my life.
Yeah.
When counterintuitively, it's actually the exact opposite.
Right.
And going through your exposures and sitting with that discomfort helps our neuropathic, learning to change and evolve and to understand, oh wait, that holding back is actually what causes that distress to be so strong. And the more I can lean into it and challenge this by doing those exposures.
Yeah.
And that kind of hierarchy, as we call it, starting with things that may seem silly to some or less scary to us, like a number or a volume on a TV, both of which I have as part of my OCD as well. It allows us to build those pathways to tackle the harder things like taking care of our children and things like that. So I'm curious if you could look back before you found us, before you came to the conference, before the foundation connected you with a new prescriber. What did you think OCD was?
Definitely the obsessive thoughts I knew, and that's something that I've struggled with my whole life. I remember even just as a kid being at the grocery store and only wanting to step on certain color tiles or looking up and counting certain things in like a classroom. And I also like to be very organized, and you see like Khloe Kardashian's like, oh, my OCD and like the way her pantry looks and stuff. I'm like, well, that's me too. But I knew that it was definitely more than just the organization and the cleanliness and germs and all of that. It's the intrusive thoughts. So being able to finally openly speak about that and just know that I'm not alone, I mean, that helped me so much too.
Definitely, and that's what's going to help continue people getting into the right treatment.
Yeah.
I actually was told I had OCD when I was a teenager. I didn't think the mental illness that I was struggling with looked like what my understanding as a teenager of what OCD was. So I kind of rejected that or thought like, that doesn't apply to me.
Right.
And that rejection prevented me from having accurate or effective treatment for a long time.
Yeah.
I wasn't until my 30s that I started doing exposures. And
Same, yeah.
And it's been life-changing. You know,
Yeah.
it's just such a different experience when you're given the tools for the actual
Totally.
disorder that you're struggling with.
Yeah, I think I definitely thought it was more of the compulsions than the obsessive part of it, and just obsessing over the compulsions. I remember a girl I went to college with was on MTV's True Life, I Have OCD. And every time she would have to walk in the door, she would have to tap it 3 times. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't have any of that.
Right.
So, like, I did think it was different.
Or I can hide it better than,
Totally.
like, I have my own compulsions, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to do them in front of everyone.
Yeah,
You know, so
because
then that must not be what I'm dealing with,
No,
because I
totally.
can control it to a certain
Yeah,
degree.
and I also never noticed her do any of that stuff until I watched her episode, and I'm like, oh, I had no idea. But I knew I didn't do stuff like that, so I was like, I guess it's not that, but it is, but there's different forms, you know?
And that specific show you're referencing is actually one of the first cultural representations that I remember of OCD as well.
Yeah.
And we're the same age and went through that same era of media, and that's what we were fed to think OCD was. And it was just these, you know, they almost want to sensationalize it and make it seem even, you know, crazier, bigger, you know, and that was part of why I never connected with having OCD.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have a representation in the media.
Right.
And then you come in and you change that narrative. You allow people to have an accurate representation of what OCD is. And now that you have those tools and resources, we can just share them with the next generation. I'm curious, you know, you talked a little bit about how OCD showed up early in your life. When you were going through your postpartum period, could you talk a bit about how your OCD was, you know, coming out around after Summer's birth?
I feel like having a miscarriage definitely was one of the triggers, because then when I got pregnant again, the entire time I was pregnant, I was worried that I was also going to lose this baby. I didn't feel her move until I was 22 weeks, 5 days. That was like the first time I felt like a real kick. Anything before that was like a flutter or gas, or I'm like, I don't know. I got a fetal Doppler and I was like making sure at home that she was okay. And I felt like I just started obsessing over that every day. I'm like, okay, I can't eat this. There was one time I ate expired sour cream and I called my mom and I started freaking out because I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna kill her. Like, I didn't realize, and it was just like obsessing over everything that like I was gonna do something wrong and I was gonna harm her. And then after I gave birth to her, they pumped me with magnesium and painkillers and all of this. When she came out, she was limp, she was blue, she didn't make a sound. And I was like, now I've had a stillborn. Like, I was so, I'm like, I did something wrong. I got pumped with too many drugs and now this is like my fault. And it was so traumatic that then that triggered even more things. And so it was just like, from losing the baby to having the baby come out, and it's not like the movies where she didn't just cry the second she came out. It was then worrying about, she's gonna die of SIDS, she's gonna stop breathing, she's gonna choke, and it was just so many things. I was so afraid of doing anything alone with her, because what if something happens? Am I gonna know? Like, I could take all of the baby CPR classes, choking, this and that, and I was like, but what happens if I'm actually in a crisis? Am I gonna know what to do? And it wasn't that crazy before I had a baby. It wasn't, I was worried about my own safety every day, or if I do this is gonna happen. It really, I think, triggered when I had the miscarriage.
Yeah, and I think having the trauma rub up against, you know, these intrusive thoughts, if it feels like this has happened to me, it can be really difficult as someone suffering with OCD to separate out what's a reasonable concern to be worried about and what is my OCD speaking, you know, informing. And I think, you know, when it comes to this story around perinatal OCD in general, especially postpartum, so many young new parents feel that way and are afraid to talk about it. But your lack of fear about talking about it is what's inspiring this generation and allowing people to understand themselves, to not feel crazy, to have a name and a diagnosis attached to what they're struggling with. And that's because of you.
Thank you.
From the whole community, thank you.
Yeah,
That
but I
really
do
is.
feel like, I mean, I was afraid to talk about it for About a year and a half. Like, I didn't open up about any of this because I didn't want it to be real. I didn't want to, admit the things that were going on inside of my head, and it was definitely a struggle to open up about. At my 6-week checkup, they just give you a questionnaire. You answer, I don't know, say maybe 20 questions to determine if you have postpartum depression. And that is like your only checkup. It's like, okay, cleared to have sex again, work out, you're good to go. But when I was answering these questions, there were a few that I lied on because I knew it wasn't PPD. I knew it wasn't that. But I'm like, I don't want them to put me on meds and diagnose me as, postpartum depression, because that's not what this is. So I'm like, I'm just gonna lie on these few questions, and I'm gonna hide my truth because, like, my doctor, like, I'm not doing that. And it was over a year of just the intrusive thoughts and everything that finally I did open up to my therapist. But
well, and part of that is such a common experience with doctors as well. Part of one of the missions at our foundation is to continue to educate and give resources to all medical professionals so that they're not so hyper-focused on postpartum depression, that they are considering OCD as well. And, we talk about screeners to get in front of, for pediatric offices, that we really want to continue to help shape the landscape of how all clinicians are thinking about OCD.
Yeah.
Because if they don't even know how to talk about it, how can we expect the patients to know and understand and how to talk about it?
Yeah, I've just learned that it's so often misdiagnosed, and there's so many women that get diagnosed with postpartum depression. And it's like, that's not what it is.
Right. And OCD is so widely known anecdotally. How many times have you heard people say, oh, I'm so OCD because I keep my books in an order,
No, literally. I was in Palm Springs with the band I do music with, and we were just like cleaning up the backyard, and one of them was hosing off, and he goes, I have an intrusive thought to like squirt you with the hose. And I was like, that's not an intrusive thought, that's just you being an asshole. And so and then I felt bad because I think I kind of embarrassed him, but I was like, no, let me explain. And my other bandmate, like him and I, like we relate on that mental health level. And so we were explaining like what intrusive thoughts are, and he was just like, oh, like, I'm sorry. And I was like, yeah, so like you just like, that's just you being a dick.
And to be able to, educate people within our sphere, those little conversations, with friends, coworkers, family, helping them understand what OCD truly is, really begins to shift the narrative. I know that I would have been able to seek treatment a lot earlier if I had just understood what OCD really was and what the results of effective treatment can be. So that, those one-on-one stories are almost just as important as going on a TV show in front of 19 million people, because you're using your sphere of influence to raise awareness and to break that stigma.
Yeah, totally.
What would you say your biggest challenge in managing your postpartum OCD has been?
Oh, I think the fear of doing things alone with my daughter has been the most challenging because no matter what we're doing, something could go wrong at any moment. I could be driving with her and someone could hit me. It's not even in my control fully. And so I feel like that has been one of the hardest things, to just accept that, things are out of our control. And if I live my life in fear, then I'm not really living. So that's been a challenge that I've overcome a lot, but I think is still always going to be there.
And raising the self-awareness to know that those intrusive thoughts are only that what we think is not who we are, helps break the cycle.
Totally.
6 years after treatment, of course I still have intrusive thoughts, but to be able to label, no, that's not how I really feel, and just, move on with your day. It's something that is a skill that you have to practice and to be trained on.
Yeah.
So, it goes back to how we effectively train these clinicians, because not everyone can just sit down and have talk therapy and cure OCD. That's not how it works. No. In fact, that can often lead people down the wrong road of treatment. So how do we as a foundation continue to train as many clinicians as possible to accurately and effectively treat OCD?
Right.
What would you say gave you the confidence to be able to speak up to your therapist and say, something's not right here, I think I have OCD?
Honestly, when the intrusive thoughts weren't just about Summer, but they were also about Brock, and I'm like, I love my husband. I do not want to stab him or run him over. So why am I seeing these things? And it was when we were moving back to LA from San Diego, and my husband has a motorcycle, and I was driving behind him. And I'm like, not that I want to run him over, but what if a big rig or something hits me and then I run him over and then he dies and I'm the one who killed him? And I was like, no, that's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. So I like kept my distance, and I'm 10 and 2, and I'm driving with Summer in the car, and I'm like, we're fine. And then later that week, we had like a double level kind of living room loft area. And our packages were on the lower level, and he asked me to bring him down a knife. And I'm bringing down the knife, and my mom had recently just tripped on these few stairs that we have. And then I saw myself tripping and accidentally stabbing him. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to kill my husband. Like, why? This was like a couple things back to back. And so as I was talking to my therapist, I'm like, okay, I just have to tell you something. This is just like, I don't know, like, what, am I subconsciously mad at him? Is there something like, do we need to do couples therapy? Is there like, am I missing something? I don't know. And she was like, have you ever been diagnosed with OCD? And I'm like, no, but I've kind of felt that way my whole life. And, you know, always like made a joke of it, like, oh my God, I'm so OCD, like you were saying earlier. And then she sent me a questionnaire and was like, let's just, you know, go through all of this. And she was like, okay, I'd say it's, you know, mild to moderate. It's not severe and completely debilitating. You know, it could get there, it might not, but let's start, you know, looking into this. And that's when we started the exposure therapy, and also EMDR she had recommended just for trauma that I felt like also was manifesting more of the intrusive thoughts and whatnot. So it was those ones with Brock where I'm like, okay, I really don't want to kill my husband. So
Yeah. And I think, you know, it takes sometimes something specific like that, your intrusive thoughts shifting, or a major life event that can really disrupt us to a degree that we finally have to reconcile with the fact that we have OCD and we need a specific type of treatment for it. For me, it was COVID. You know, I have always struggled with my OCD, but I, you know, perfectionist, so I can compartmentalize and manage and kind of just feel discomfort but get through it. And finally, when the world stopped, I couldn't even use doorknobs in my own home. I was using my t-shirt to open my bedroom door. Yeah, I do that at a public restroom, you know, at the time, but this is the first time I couldn't even walk around my house barefoot. Everything felt so coated in this lava-like germs that it just was all I could think about. I would secretly follow around my then boyfriend, now husband, with cleaning supplies after he'd walk the dog or something, because I could see germs that he couldn't. And it was finally just, you know, conversations through coworkers and resources at the foundation where I was like, I'm struggling and I don't want to struggle like this anymore. And through our program director and other staff members, they helped me get into almost immediate effective treatment. And I do understand the privilege that comes with that. With some individuals, it's really hard for them to get into OCD treatment, even when they know that. But I'm so grateful for that, and it's changed my life ever since. You know, and now navigating through, of course, I have triggers and moments that I struggle with, but I have the self-awareness, the tools, the resources, the support, and it has changed my life completely.
Yeah, I was crazy obsessive during that time as well. It was the longest I've ever not seen my parents in my entire life, because I was just like, no, I feel like I'm asymptomatic. And I, you know, when I went to the grocery store, I totally got COVID, even though I had a mask, and I made sure the cart was wiped down. And then anytime we needed to get gas and things like that. And I feel like that's even now a bit of exposure therapy for me, where I'm like, I mean, it's maybe gross, but I'm like, you know, I get gas. I don't necessarily wash my hands right after. When I get to the next destination, then but I'm like, oh, remember when I had to wipe everything down? And I'm like, it's still germs, but I'm like, it's not going to kill me. You know, my daughter drops her fruit snack on the floor. I'm like, 5-second rule, you're fine. 4 years ago, there was no 5-second rule. That's going to kill you. So,
exactly. And, you know, it continues to evolve as we understand ourselves more and more. But having that flag to point down that for you and Brock's, you know, the intrusive thoughts around that, or for COVID, it's helpful to be able to look back at this journey we've come on and where we're landing now. Part of something that's been effective with my recovering is talking to people about my journey and hearing from them. I had a similar experience. I went through that as well. I'm always plugging resources and trying to get people treatment, but it also helps me. It's healing to hear we are a community, and it is a reminder about where you've come from to where you are now. Do you have anything that you would say, landing here now, advice that you would give Scheana from a few years ago before you had really labeled all of this?
Probably just to be a full open book, because that's one thing I've always prided myself on, being an open book, but there have also been things that I hid from my family, from friends, from production, whether it was in my first marriage and relationship, to the intrusive thoughts. And, maybe if I had been open about what was going on sooner, my postpartum OCD wouldn't have been as bad. Maybe it still would have. I still, had the miscarriage. But I think just talking about it is literally, it makes a world of difference, because I found out my cousin struggles with it, and just like so many people. And then also even just having the miscarriage, another cousin I found out had one or maybe even two miscarriages. And there was just so many things where I'm like, I didn't even know these things about my family, but because now I'm speaking openly about it, I've had cousins open up to me, and I'm like, why didn't we talk about this before? But it's just something you suffer in silence. And I literally, in one of my new songs coming out soon, I have a line where I say, like, there were just so many nights where it was just like I was suffering in silence because I didn't want to open up about the things I was feeling and thinking.
And it's, again, one of those counterintuitive things where once we start talking about it, the healing can begin.
Yeah.
But the more we're like, I don't have that, I'm not struggling, that's your worst. That's when you're struggling the most.
And then it's just like on a loop, and you just keep thinking, I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, but it could happen, but it's not going to happen, but it could happen. And it's like, you're driving over the freeway overpass, and you're like, what if I went off? I don't want to kill myself. I don't want to drive off it. I know I'm not going to, but I'm like, but what if, no. Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
And
you're constantly at war with yourself, trying to say, that's not true. That's not how I feel. Those thoughts, we can just label as thoughts and move on. And that's something, again, that you have to practice and learn as a skill.
Totally.
As we're talking about, OCD can be really isolating. It can prevent you from seeking community. It can make you feel alone. It can make you feel like you're the only one, make you feel crazy, like something's wrong with you. What has it meant to you in terms of building this new community of people who also have OCD that you've been connecting with the last year?
It just means the world to know that, like, we're not alone. I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy, but just knowing that there, what did you say, 238 million?
Yeah.
That's insane. That's countries. It's so many people.
Right.
So just knowing that we're not alone, and the more we do break the stigma and be open and talk about it, the more people who are able to get help. And I just think that's the most important thing, is letting people know that you're not alone. And if I could do this on a public platform in front of millions of people, you can do it with your therapist, with your partner, with your parents, I just want people to know it's okay to talk about it and to be open about it, because they might find out their parent suffers from this as well, or their partner. It's like, once you're open about it and you find out, they're like, oh my God, me too. And you're like, you never said anything. Well, you never said anything. And it just opens up this whole discussion of not feeling alone.
Exactly. And it's this little club that we're in.
I
still remember meeting you, and we just had that instant connection. Yeah. And it's just this level of, like, she gets it, And
totally. Brock was like, Scheana, these are your people. I'm like, I've been looking for a charity or foundation, just something that I could be a part of, that I'm passionate about. And I do my monthly donations, St. Jude, ASPCA, Captain Jason has a charity building schools for children. And I've done all of these things, and I am passionate about those, but this is so personally passionate for me. And because it is a daily struggle that gets easier every day, I recognize that these are not real things that are going to happen, but it's something I am just so passionate about. I'm so thankful to the network and the producers for showing this story, because so many things get left on the cutting room floor. So many things don't make it into the show, but the fact that this part of my story more than any other story that's been told on 11 seasons of Vanderpump Rules, the fact that this made it in, I'm so proud of, and I'm just so happy that it's helping so many people.
And you're using that sphere of influence to impact the community in such a positive way. You know, it's something that you said earlier about, yeah, I may have this platform, 19 million viewers, but it's just as important for everybody who has their family, their loved ones, and you give them that confidence and courage to be able to go home and have those conversations. So hearing how rewarding it is for you to connect your charitable self, you know, with something that actually strikes home in a specific way is beautiful to hear you talk about.
Thank you.
What would you say to those watching who think they may have OCD but haven't spoken up about it yet? What advice would you give them?
To be open, to just, you know, face the uncomfortable and the scary part of saying out loud what's going on inside of your head, because it is so freeing once you get it out. Like, I mean, I would tell a stranger about my scariest intrusive thought that I wouldn't tell my mother now. And now I'm like, oh, you guys want to know what happened today up here? Like, I mean, it's just things that I never would have talked about. And it feels like a literal weight lifted off my chest, being able to just say all of the dark, sick thoughts that go on in here sometimes.
I totally agree with all of that.
Yeah.
And people are inspired and impassioned by you. So thank you again for this vulnerable moment and all that you've shared this year. Before we wrap up, Scheana, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
The impact that you're having on our community and on our foundation is so valuable, and we are just so grateful for you to take this time and to continue to grow with us. You continue to help so many people by sharing your journey, and I can see it inspire and help you on the other side, and it's just really exciting to be part of.
Thank you.
If you need more help, you're looking for resources, please visit iocdf.org and check out our website for more information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Becky Dusser. As Executive Director of the International OCD Foundation, I thank you for watching. For nearly 40 years, the IOCDF has provided life-saving resources to a wide community of people, as well as their loved ones and family members. We also provide world-class training and education for mental health professionals and fund research to understand what causes OCD and how it can be best treated. Together, we are building a future where everyone impacted by OCD and related disorders has immediate access to effective treatment and support. This vision can only be realized when there's broad awareness, understanding, and acceptance of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Everyone who shares their OCD story and everyone who listens with compassion is contributing to a world of hope and healing for all those affected. By making a donation to support our work, we can create a future where every person affected by OCD and related disorders has the support they need to thrive. I hope you'll join our community and learn more at iocdf.org.